The history of the Catholic Church is filled with secrets that are rarely spoken about. Behind the grand cathedrals are hidden stories that change the way we see the church itself. Stay tuned, because you're about to hear 7 shocking moments that the Catholic Church doesn't like to talk about. The real meaning of Peter's rock. One of the most famous teachings in Catholic tradition is that Jesus chose Peter as the first pope. People often hear the verse where Jesus says, "You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church." For centuries, this has been used as proof that Peter was the foundation of everything that followed. But when you look carefully at the earliest Christian writings, you notice something strange. Peter was important, yes, but he wasn't presented as the one and only leader. In fact, in the book of Acts, Peter is shown as someone who debated with others, sometimes even being corrected. At one point, the Apostle Paul openly disagreed with him and challenged his decisions. The real surprise comes at the Council of Jerusalem, one of the first big meetings of the Christian community. When everyone gathered to decide how non-Jewish followers should live out their new faith, it wasn't Peter who gave the final word. It was James, the brother of Jesus. This shows that leadership in the early church was shared, not centered on one man. The idea that Peter was the single foundation looks more like a tradition created later, once the church in Rome wanted to claim higher authority over other churches. This is shocking because the whole idea of the papacy, which is the Pope being the successor of Peter, rests on that one verse. If that verse was never meant to establish a Pope, then the very structure of the Catholic Church was built on an interpretation, not on a clear command from Jesus himself. Over time, church leaders in Rome used that verse to build authority, linking themselves directly to Peter to strengthen their power. But in the beginning, things were not so simple. The birth of the word Catholic. Most people assume the Catholic Church has always been called Catholic, but the word itself doesn't appear anywhere in the Bible. Early Christians didn't walk around saying they were Catholic. They called themselves followers of the way, or simply disciples of Christ. The word Catholic, which means universal, first appeared around the year 107 AD in a letter written by Ignatius of Antioch, one of the early church leaders. He used it to describe the Christian community as a whole. At first, it might have been just a casual word, but it quickly became much more than that. Once the term caught on, it gave one group of Christians the power to claim that they were the universal true church, while others were outsiders. That single word set the stage for separation, for the drawing of lines between who was considered inside and who was pushed outside. The moment Christianity took on the label Catholic, it stopped being just a small movement of believers and started building an identity as a global institution. This detail may sound small, but it was one of the most important steps in history. It's shocking because one word shaped the direction of Christianity for centuries. By claiming universality, the Catholic Church positioned itself as the one true authority and dismissed rivals as heretics. It gave leaders a tool to defend their growing power and to silence anyone with different ideas. Constantine's political conversion. The story of Constantine is told as a great miracle. He was a Roman emperor who saw a vision of a cross before a big battle, placed the Christian symbol on his soldiers' shields, and won a great victory. Afterward, he converted to Christianity and everything changed. That's the version most people know, but the real details show a different picture. Constantine's conversion was not so simple. He didn't immediately give up his old pagan religion. In fact, he kept worshiping the sun god, Sol Invictus, for most of his life. Coins from his reign still carried the image of the sun god, even after he favored Christianity. What Constantine really saw was the chance to use religion as a tool. His empire was divided, and he needed something strong enough to bring people together. Christianity, with its growing numbers and strong community bonds, gave him exactly that. In 313, he issued the Edict of Milan, which made Christianity legal. That ended centuries of persecution. For Christians, it felt like a miracle, but for Constantine, it was strategy. He knew the Christian movement could help stabilize his empire. His baptism didn't even happen until he was on his deathbed, which makes many historians question whether he truly believed or whether he simply used the religion for political gain. This moment is shocking because it shows how tightly faith and politics became tied from the very beginning. The church's rise wasn't only about miracles or faith, it was about empire and power. Constantine turned Christianity from a hunted minority into a partner of the state. The Catholic Church gained its first real taste of political power through him, and that alliance changed the future forever. The Council of Nicaea and the making of doctrine. In the year 325, Constantine gathered bishops from across his empire for a meeting in the city of Nicaea. It was the first council of its kind, and its purpose was to end the fierce arguments tearing Christians apart. At the center of the debate was a huge question: who exactly was Jesus? Some said he was fully divine, equal with God. Others believed he was created by God and not equal in power. These disagreements weren't just small details, they threatened to split the church in two. The bishops argued fiercely, forming groups and alliances. It wasn't a calm, prayerful meeting. It was heated, loud, and political. Constantine himself pushed for a decision because he knew a divided church could divide his empire. In the end, the council declared that Jesus was of the same substance as God the Father, fully divine. Anyone who disagreed was labeled a heretic. Those leaders were removed, exiled, or silenced. This was a turning point. It was the moment the church began defining official doctrine through councils, not just through scripture or the teachings of Jesus. Doctrines weren't revealed from heaven. They were debated, voted on, and then enforced with imperial backing. That's shocking to think about. What millions of Christians later accepted as timeless truth was decided in a room where politics and faith were tangled together. The lost gospels that were erased from history. Most people think the Bible we have today has always been exactly the same from the beginning, but in the first few centuries of Christianity, there wasn't one fixed Bible. Instead, different groups of believers had their own writings and traditions. Some communities followed the Gospel of Matthew, others used the Gospel of John, and still others read books most people today have never even heard of. There was the Gospel of Thomas, filled with sayings of Jesus that sounded more like mysterious wisdom than stories. There was the Gospel of Mary, which gave Mary Magdalene a voice that challenged the male disciples. And there were Gnostic texts, which taught that secret knowledge, not blind faith, was the true path to the divine. For a long time, these writings were treasured by groups of Christians. But as the Catholic Church grew stronger, it wanted to create one official version of the faith. To do this, church leaders had to make choices about which writings would be kept and which would be destroyed. Councils were called, debates were held, and in the end, dozens of texts were rejected. Many were labeled heresy, burned, or hidden away. By the time the Bible was finalized, only a small collection of books made it in. For centuries, people thought the others were gone forever, but in 1945, a group of farmers in Nag Hammadi, Egypt, dug up jars filled with ancient manuscripts. Inside were copies of the so-called lost gospels, giving the world a glimpse of what Christianity could have looked like if history had taken a different turn. The shocking part is this: the Bible wasn't dropped from the sky fully formed. It was built piece by piece through decisions made by men, decisions that shaped what billions of people would later believe. Christians persecuting other Christians. When people think of persecution in early Christianity, they imagine Roman soldiers dragging believers into arenas, throwing them to lions, or burning them alive. And it's true, the early church suffered terribly under Roman rule. But what many people don't know is that once Christianity gained power, the tables turned. The Catholic Church began persecuting not only pagans, but also other Christians. After councils like Nicaea decided what true belief was, anyone who disagreed was branded a heretic. Bishops who refused to accept the decisions were forced out, exiled, or sometimes even killed. The church that once begged for freedom now used power to crush those who didn't fall in line. Over the centuries, this pattern only grew stronger. By the Middle Ages, entire groups of Christians who believed differently were wiped out. One of the most chilling examples is the cathars in southern France. They believed in living simple, pure lives and rejected the wealth and power of the Catholic hierarchy. The church declared them heretics and launched a crusade against them in the 1200s. Villages were burned, thousands were killed, and their faith was erased. The Inquisition, set up later, continued this mission by hunting down and punishing anyone accused of heresy. The shocking truth here is that Christians who once prayed for mercy under Roman swords became the ones holding the sword themselves. The message of love and forgiveness preached by Jesus was overshadowed by fear, power, and control. This isn't just a small detail, it's one of the darkest parts of church history. Instead of protecting freedom of belief, the Catholic Church used its authority to silence and destroy its own brothers and sisters in faith. That's a side of the story that rarely makes it into Sunday sermons. The crisis of the three popes. The Catholic Church is often described as a rock of stability, with the Pope standing as the clear leader of all believers. But history tells a very different story. In the late Middle Ages, the Church faced one of its biggest scandals, a time when there wasn't just one Pope, but three. It began in the late 1300s. Political conflicts and corruption within the Church split leaders into rival camps. One pope ruled in Rome, another claimed authority in Avignon, and later a third one was elected in Pisa. Each man insisted he was the true successor of Peter. Each had his own court, his own followers, and even his own army supporting him. Ordinary believers were left in total confusion. Who was the real pope? Who spoke for God? For decades, Christians across Europe were divided, forced to choose which pope they would obey. This period, known as the Western Schism, lasted nearly 40 years. It was a disaster for the church's reputation. The very institution that claimed to be guided directly by God was caught in a power struggle that looked more like politics than faith. Eventually, the Council of Constance in the early 1400s ended the chaos by removing the rivals and electing a single pope. But the damage was already done. What makes this moment so shocking is what it reveals. The papacy was not always a stable throne handed down in an unbroken line. It was shaped by human ambition, political alliances, and even outright corruption. For many believers, the crisis of the three popes shook their trust in the church's authority. If you found this eye-opening, make sure to like this video, share it with someone, and subscribe for more untold and secret stories from the past. Your support helps bring more of these hidden truths to light.